first veterinary pet insurance was actually started in 1982 by one of the companies that's still around, and that's BPI. It was actually for Lassie. But it was the first time that pet insurance had ever been offered in the U.S. That's dramatically different than the situation in Europe. Europe, with their socialized medicine for people, actually many of the countries have pets as part of the family, and they're covered in their policies. In Sweden, 70% of the pets are covered, and Denmark, about 60%. Even Spain, with all its economic problems right now, have over 25% of the animals covered on insurance policies. The U.S. has 3, maybe. 2% of dogs, 1% of cats being covered. So it's an interesting thing, but it is increasing in popularity. One of the things from our standpoint of veterinary medicine is with that few pets being covered by policies, the insurance companies don't hold sway over us as a profession as they do in human medicine. Because in human medicine, everything's contested. There's 8 people involved in every decision. And so they just cannot dictate to us like the insurance companies can dictate to the HMOs and the PPOs and all these various insurance plans. And of course, with the Affordable Care Health Act coming up, the big question is what's going to happen to insurance? Is it going to be less expensive? All those questions. The cost of veterinary medicine to consumers has gone up greatly as well over the last 20 years. Increasing technology, increasing expectations of clients for the quality of medicine that they get, demand that there's more technology on our part, there's more procedures done. The field of veterinary medicine with all its specialists now is increasing more and more every year as well. So the cost of veterinary medicine to consumers has gone up, and so it makes the whole concept of insurance more attractable to people. The average dog owner spends about $278. It's interesting to watch what Consumer Reports and all these surveys say. But really, a healthy dog, the average cost for a consumer in the U.S. is about $280 for plans. That's your physicals and your vaccines, things like heartworm tests, fecal checks, things like that. The average surgery cost, if your animal has to have surgery for a dog, is well over $500, $532. Cats, it's about $200 for wellness and about $280 if it goes into surgery. Those are numbers, but that really isn't the focus of what insurance should be about. Insurance generally is going to be for those extraordinary circumstances that you encounter where you really start to rack up some charges. And boy, they can pile up fast. It's not uncommon for a knee surgery in this area, depending on what kind of surgery you're going to have for your dog. Mostly knee surgeries are done in dogs much more than cats. But it's become a $1 billion industry in the U.S., knee surgeries alone. Just the amount of dogs. Our pet population is aging as well. So we're seeing a lot more pets getting older and living longer. And a lot of that's due to the extraordinary care that's offered by their owners in cooperation with the veterinarians. But age does cause some more issues for pets, and people are more and more willing to take care of them. So if you look at the insurance industry in veterinary medicine, some of it's spin-offs of human agencies that feel they can do a better job because of their experience in the human field. Others are just strictly entrepreneurial efforts that have come up to say, we think we can do a good job. And there's a lot of them. I mean, we've got a lot of information for you here, but it's an interesting fact that over 87% of the insurance for pets is controlled by 3 different companies. The original company that started it, called VPI, there's 24-hour pet care is another plan that's called, and then the ASPCA. So those 3 companies control 87% of the policies written in the United States. Saying that, there's over 40 different insurance plans out there, and many of those have different gold, platinum, silver levels. So it gets really interesting, and it's really imperative that if you get an insurance plan, you understand you have to sit down and read it. Because the time that most reading's done is at the time of the event that triggers it, and then it's, oh my gosh, is this event covered or not? If so, how much of it's covered? And so if there's any messages, we've got some information here about the questions you should ask of an insurance policy, the things that you should consider with it, and understand that it's all going to be tailored to your individual needs for your pets. You know, if you have specific breeds, there are certain plans that won't cover, for instance, Shar-Peis. So we're just not going to do it. They've got too much going on, and we're not going to cover them. Now, that's not every insurance company, but every insurance company is going to have a lot of caveats to what they're covering and what they won't cover with your various plans that you look at. So if there's one message that I think is probably the most important, is that you sit down and read the information. We're going to send you home today with some spreadsheets or comparisons that are there. But I've been very impressed over the last 2 weeks as I've been looking at these plans and looking at the various companies, because we get new ones in every day. Somebody comes in and gives us a sheet of paper and say, wow, never heard of this one, you know, what's it entail? And there's various degrees of involvement that we have to do or that you have to do. So again, reading the plan, understanding how that fits into your situation, I think is probably the most important consideration in this whole discussion today. It's a very competitive field. Most of the companies have several different levels, several different deductions, and you have to decide. I was in my office earlier. Who has 2 little old Chihuahuas that were rescue dogs that were abused early?
I did.
Yeah. You know, you're going to be in a much different situation than the person that brings in an 8-week-old puppy for us. And not necessarily a worse situation. Obviously, they're doing okay if they're very old, but you've got to figure out how much is going to occur and what are the breed specifics. But I have been impressed with the websites that these people and these companies have. And so I'd really encourage you, before you make any commitments, to look at the various websites and consider what's going on. A lot of them have the breed specificities. You know, again, if you look at knee surgeries, because that's a big issue, they've got what breeds are most commonly affected. And what's really happening in the veterinary industry as they fine-tune this is it's a tremendous collection of data that they're getting now. And my good friend is the dean of the veterinary school up at Washington State, and they are really digging in deeply to the data that they get, so they decide where their efforts should be as a veterinary school to put their efforts at what are the most common and prevalent diseases that they're dealing with. And so as these insurance companies gather more and more information about our pets, you can bet that they're going to fine-tune their plans as well. So it's a very interesting industry. It's really going to become a lot more players in the field. They look at veterinary medicine and the bond that we have with our animals as a gold mine for them, quite honestly. And as the cost of veterinary medicine go up, it's going to be more prevalent in there. And boy, there's all these plans popping up. When you look at consumer reviews, there's about 3 different plans that are out there in their structure. One is akin to catastrophic insurance. Those kind of plans generally will allow you to have various deductions on them, and they'll have, maybe a yearly fee, and then maybe a $200 deduction, maybe a $400 deduction, maybe a $600 deduction. But then they pay a very high percentage. Sandy and I were talking earlier today. We have a client who has, which plan was it? Pet plan, wasn't it?
That's pet plan.
Yeah, pet plan, one of 25. But it's kind of catastrophic coverage. But his dog had pneumonia, and over the course of all this treatment, it was about $7,000.
Whoa.
You go down to the emergency clinic and you get some criticalists involved and you get critical care, and you can rack up some big bills. The highest bill we've encountered, that I've encountered, not from here, but I mean from talking to some of the people that I know in the insurance industry, was that a dog that went up to Davis and had a blood clot into its spine. And so it was 37 days at Davis, and it was over $40,000. Now, I hope none of us ever have to incur that, but $37,000 of that was paid by their insurance.
Oh, wow.
Catastrophic plan,
Catastrophic.
just saying, we'll have a $500 deductible, but it's going to cover 90% of anything above that. Again, if it's the average that a dog that's going to surgery is going to be around $500 a year, that's average. But that's not the case. Your dog swallows a ball and has to have a gastrotomy, and it's going to be $2,000-3,000 by the time that surgery is done. They've had their hospitalization. It's not bad. We have I've done some hip resections where we take the femoral head out of dogs with arthritis. $2,500, and this person's insurance covered 90% of that. So it is an attractive thing for us as practitioners and for us as business people, because this is kind of a crude term, I think, but there's a lot of what they call compassion cremations done, which people are presented with a terrible situation where it's going to say, here's your estimate's going to be $3,000. And they say, we just can't handle that. Here at our hospital, we have a Good Samaritan Fund, and we'll often contribute money to try and help that situation. But a lot of times you're just presented with situations that are out of your control. So a catastrophic plan, that nobody likes to call it that in the insurance industry, but it's what it's for. It's for you to be able to have the ability to meet those things. Now, I have a new puppy that eats everything in the world, and I swear I'm gonna he's gonna challenge me. And then I thought about my old lab, who had about 11 surgeries, and it's a good thing I owned him, because he would have broke the bank as well, But so those are one thing, and so again, several different flavors of these plans based on what you feel comfortable with a deductible, what level you're going to go. One of the things you want to watch, is there a lifetime limit to this? And is there a recurring deductible every event? Or is it a deductible for a year? And these are all the kind of fine print that the plans have that you need to be aware of. The other kind of plans then vary, and again, I love the star, diamond levels, or the gold, silver, platinum levels of everything. If you read consumer reviews, overall, they're not too keen on wellness plans. Okay? A wellness plan is an insurance policy that says we're going to cover your dog's vaccines, fecal exam, and the thought is we're going to keep that animal as healthy as we can so we don't have to pay. Problem with that is that in their reviews, and I'm just trying to be as unbiased, I don't have any horse in this race, but they try and be as unbiased as possible, and what they say is they never really recoup your investment with a wellness plan, because they'll charge you extra. They know that if your yearly average rate's going to be around $300, they'll try and make sure that they make a profit on that as well. So I have some sources here, and I'd be happy to copy them off or show you some of them for consumer reviews, which show that in general, wellness plans did not, you paid more for the wellness plan than you recouped, bottom line. And so in general reviews, it was the overall attitude that wellness plans were not good for the consumer. So catastrophic plans, wellness plans are the basic foundation of most of the plans that you will see. There are certain breed restrictions. There are caps on totals that you may do. You know, if you have 16 Saint Bernards, they may, as an individual, limit the amount for you as an individual, not just per pet. So there's a lot of stuff to cover in it, and it's only going to get a little more confusing. Some of the things you have to consider are the reviews and the feedback. How quickly do they respond? What kind of deals do they offer? How much paperwork is involved? Many of them now go to where there's no paperwork involved on your part, which I think is a nice thing. Can you do it online? Some people complain that some of these companies require a lot of stuff. The other thing is, and this is a little bit tricky, besides reading your plan carefully, if you decide to do it, is do it quickly. The reason being pre-existing conditions. A big thing. And we've even had to contest a lot of companies on that. I had a case about 8 or 9 years ago about a little Australian Shepherd puppy that I had seen at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, spayed it at 6 months. And the owner was coming down the stairs one evening, and the dog was sleeping on the top step, and she stepped on the dog. She broke her ankle. The dog dislocated its kneecap. And when the claim went in, they said, well, that miniature Australian has that as has it as a genetic condition, and so we don't cover that. Well, we argued that point successfully. Then they said, well, it was a pre-existing condition. And we said, no. When we do a physical exam on new puppies and kittens, we specifically look at things like umbilical hernias, the status of their knees, are there any eye abnormalities or anything like that. Now, some genetically predisposed conditions or pre-existing conditions are never going to be covered in these plans. We have one plan now called Trupanion that gives you the first 30 days free. And if your animal, and you get it as a young puppy or kitten, and you sign right there, the first 30 days are free, and we've had animals that got sick in that time frame, and they were covered. And we saw them, I mean, we have to say that they didn't have a whopping heart murmur, or, 3 legs and only 1 eye, but when we sign off on it, then they're ready to go and stuff. So you need to look carefully at what they will cover, and there are certain things, and they have this weird little condition called pre-existing but curable, and maybe that might be covered. So it's again, I'm not trying to confuse you, but I'm trying to point out the pitfalls and the things that you need to start to consider when you look at a program like this. And so, from my standpoint, I don't think you can cover all 24, 30. I think you should pick out some that are kind of reputable and dig down into them a little deeper but answer those basic questions. What's the purpose of insurance for you and your pets at this time? Is it, if it's, if you say, hey, I'm willing to have a $500 deductible to get 90% coverage on anything that might pop up, understand that that's not going to cover the cost of your fecal exams and your vaccines and your wellness exams. I mean, that's going to be part of your built-in budget for your pets or pets during that time. But boy, when they come in and they're diabetic, then you're golden, you know? I mean, because that really racks it up over time, because you've got a pet with a manageable but not curable disease at this point in time at least, and it can live for years. But it's going to have some blood glucose checks, it's going to have some panels to make sure that everything else is doing okay, your supplies, all that kind of stuff. So those are the kind of situations that we see every day with what's going on. You know, the basic questions you need to ask first is, what kind of plan do I want? And you know, if you have a cat that lives in an apartment that never gets out, then perhaps a wellness plan would be okay, because you're taking away a lot of risk of abscesses and trauma and things like that. So.
And kind of the older they get too, doesn't it cost more to?
Well, some of them limit it at like 14 years of age. They say
Okay.
we're not going to cover them after 14 years of age. That's, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've seen several policies that say we'll do that, others say no, we don't care. I
You mean for initial coverage, or they don't cut you off if you're an existing?
both? Some of them,
Really?
yeah, some of them both.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
Yeah, Sandy.
I think it's important to point out too, when you're looking at a plan, that many of them have a waiting period of some sort.
Oh.
So we had a client recently with a shepherd. She bought the plan. There was a 30-day waiting period. She really didn't pay attention to that. Dog started limping on and off. She brought him in. He was diagnosed with elbow dysplasia and hip dysplasia. She submitted it. She was about 5 days out from that waiting period being done, and it was by no means an emergency, so that's all
Right.
pre-existing now. None of his anti-inflammatories are covered, none of his x-rays follow-up, none of that's covered because she didn't pay attention to the waiting period. So pay attention to waiting periods if you get a plan. I think that's an important point. And a lot of these plans, if you go online, you can punch in your breed, where, you know, your
They'll
zip
give you
code, your
quote
age, and
right
they'll
there.
give you a quote right there. You don't have to commit to anything. They'll give you an idea of what the
Okay.
premiums would cost for basic plans.
Okay.
So a lot of them offer that.
And then you just mentioned something with the anti-inflammatories. They would often cover medications too if you
Yes,
need it for
absolutely.
something. Okay.
Some of them do prescription diets now. Some of them do
Oh, wow.
behavioral medications. So, I mean, there's a lot of different types of coverage out there.
Okay.
The other thing is, there are flyers, and there's all kinds of flyers. We offer acupuncture, laser therapy, which are alternative medicine. A lot of insurance companies would consider alternative medicine therapies. And sometimes you can buy a rider for that, for, you know, like, okay, for $5 a month, you know, we would cover your acupuncture charges or your laser therapy that we do. Although laser, I think, is becoming much more prevalent in veterinary medicine. We use it after all of our surgeries, recovering from wounds, arthritic things. Acupuncture is still not covered by the vast majority of insurance policies without an additional rider, but it is available.
In terms of reimbursements and stuff like that,
Mhm.
now I'm very skeptical of people insurance and just what a hassle it is, right?
Right.
So putting that onto the animals.
Yeah.
Is there any company that you've dealt with or that comes to mind, or maybe Amy, when you're trying to help people, that you seem to, it's recurring that, gee, it's hard getting reimbursed from this, or they want to fight things all the time, or, you know, anything like that?
In my experience, VPI is very, you know, they got people looking things over a lot,
Okay.
you know, from that standpoint. I think the best way to check that out is these consumer reports.
Okay.
Because they've got the feedback from hundreds and thousands
Okay.
of queries. The other thing is, who's the check go to? Do you have to pay the money up front?
Oh.
And then you depended on getting reimbursed, and that's what VPI is. You pay us, and then you submit your claim. And most of them are that way. But the question is, what's their record? How long does it take to get reimbursed? That kind of situation.
There are also a few companies where if you're presented with, hey, my dog has this whatever situation, you can actually call and get what they call like emergency approval, or get the input up
Oh.
front before you decide how to proceed, if they're gonna cover it or not. So it's not,
Oh, okay.
some of the companies will offer you, you call in, they'll, within an hour, they'll be able to tell you, hey, this is likely, this is
Okay.
gonna be
So
covered.
instead of
or-
hoping they'll cover it. and you
Right,
go ahead
so a
and
lot
do
of them will
it.
offer some information
Oh, okay.
to you, in those situations where you can get information in about an hour.
Okay.
They'll run the records, they might ask for a copy of something or might talk to us directly.
Right.
But they can kind of give you an emergency approval so you know how to proceed or you know what
Okay.
you're in for.
Right.
And again, that's not every company, but some of them do offer that. And another stat I would look at personally is how long does it take for them to pay you back?
Right.
Is it a 2-week thing?
Right.
Great, because I can charge it and get my money and pay off my card,
Right,
right?
right.
Is the average longer? So those are
Okay.
the things I would look at too.
Okay.
Let me give you this website though. I mean, it's Pet Insurance Guide US.com. Pet Insurance Guide, and it's this Dr. Doug Kenny, and he's just kind of gone nuts about this stuff. And I mean, and he's got a thing called the Pet Insurance Toolkit, which he will gladly sell you for $8.99. But you kind of plug in your information to it, and supposedly you come out with the answer about what's the best thing for you. The way that I kind of look at it as a Labrador owner, and I've now got a Lab Terrier thing, is what's the worst case? What's the worst case? I mean, to me, that's what insurance is about. What's the worst case? If my car gets smashed, what's the worst case? It's gonna cost me $500 deductible, and if it's totaled, they're gonna pay for it, And I got some liability insurance in there in case it was my fault. But, to me, that's the safety net that I think it should provide. I think you should feel comfortable that your pet is not a burden, and that it's a valuable family member, and that when the worst possible thing that could happen, this is what you could expect. And then it makes that decision in a crisis time much easier for you. It's terrible for us to watch people anguish over and say, can I borrow money from my mom? Can I, we have a plan called Care Credit, which is really an extraordinary thing to be able to offer people who are strapped. But I mean, a lot of that goes out the window in your decision making if you have insurance. And that is comforting. And in hard economics times, it's a Hobson's choice. If you really got some financial constraints, then insurance is still very important, but it might be too expensive. So there are some tough decisions to be made at times about that kind of stuff.